Good afternoon, everybody. Warm welcome to everybody to this last session of the 16th Vermont Organics Recycling Summit, organized by the Composting Association of Vermont in partnership with Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. We're holding the summit this year in conjunction with International Compost Awareness Week, one of the largest outreach and education initiatives of the composting industry. And this year's theme is Recipe for Regeneration Compost. And I imagine all of you know me by now, but just in case you don't, I'm Natasha Duarte, the director of the Composting Association of Vermont. Before we get into our program this afternoon, I'd like to just take the time to give a huge thank you to all of our fabulous sponsors, without whom we really wouldn't be able to make all of this week-long program available free of charge for everybody. And so one of the things we've been working on is really lowering the bar of participation, hopefully making this material really accessible throughout the week. And all of these folks really help us achieve that goal. Our sponsors this year are Community Bank, Eco Products, Vegware, Addison County Solid Waste Management District, Vermont Natural Ag Products, AgriLab Technologies, Compost Manufacturing Alliance, EcoPixel, Nature Cycle, the Vermont Produce Program of Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Foods and Markets, and Wasted, Separating Waste, Connecting Communities. So just a real big thanks to them for helping support this program. And before we get going with today's program, because it's related to our topic for this session, I wanted to just play this very short video, which is the International Compost Awareness Week winner, who happens to be from Vermont, which I just thought was fabulous. This video is from Senya, and she is from Vermont, and she is 11 years old. So very short, but I was very excited to see Vermont once again on the national stage, sharing what we learn and all of the work that our whole community, all of our community members are doing here in the state to promote and support composting and organics diversion. And so here we are in the last session of the day and of the week, compost soil science and hydrology activities for K through 12 schools. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here and invite Kat Buxton to share hers while I introduce you both. Kat Buxton is a change facilitator working to build the social mycelium that holds our communities together. She promotes soil health and food system change through education and advocacy, working with individual schools, community groups, and statewide organizations to make a difference, one meal, one compost pile, and one landscape at a time. Kat leads land listener workshops with the Soil Carbon Coalition and organizes the Upper Valley Apple Corps and a host of other projects, including the Vermont Healthy Soil Coalition. She consults, teaches, and presents about soil and ecosystem health to individuals of all ages and groups of all sizes. And you can learn more about her at growmorewasteless.com. And her co-presenter today is Julie Parker-Dickerson, whose passion throughout her career has been focused on environmental education. She's a teacher at Smilie Memorial School in Bolton, Vermont, and a master gardener. In her small rural corner of Charlotte, Vermont, she's been working with the local town government and neighbors to reclaim spaces at intersections and along roadsides and to create beautiful gardens for all creatures, great and small, to enjoy. And so with that, Kat and Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. I think I'm unmuted.
Yep, you sound great.
Great, okay, because you've all disappeared because my screen is really big. We're going to start off by sharing a short little video. And yes, my name is Kat Buxton. I'm so glad to be here with you, with Julia. Our presentation today is going to start out with this little video Then we're going to go into a slideshow to share our experiences with the topic at hand. And then we're going to open it up for discussion and share some activities and hopefully get inspired together. So I'm going to go ahead and share. Natasha, pipe up if my volume is too low.
We're looking at two landscapes here. On the red plate, this is a degraded landscape. It's flour as a stand-in for a degraded landscape, which is dirt, sand, silt, and clay. Broken up rocks. On the green plate is bread, and it's a stand-in for a healthy landscape. It's sand, silt, clay, and biology. Super important. Let's see what happens when we rain on these landscapes. Pouring water into a rain cloud, of course, and the rain cloud is causing erosion. The rain is causing erosion. We see some runoff. There appears to be flooding. The color of that water indicates that the soil itself, or the landscape, is now a part of the water system. We have dry places all over the landscape, but yet there's flooding. This seems to be flooding and drought at the same time. If we were a plant in this landscape and there was a drought and places did not get water, it would be dry at the bottom. So let's see. We find a totally dry plate on the bottom. So if we're a plant in this landscape, our roots would not have just gotten a drink. We would be thirsty. Flooding, drought in the same place, poor water quality. If you were farming or gardening in this landscape or adding any type of household chemicals to this landscape, those would now be in the waterway. Let's see what happens when we rain on a healthy landscape. On the bread. The water is infiltrating into the sponge of the soil. It's soaking in like a sponge. Those pore spaces that hold the bread out are happening because yeast is the magic ingredient in bread, which is the biology in bread. That's what makes air spaces those organisms breathe. Those pores are held together in landscapes by the goose glues, snots, and slimes that are produced by biological soil organisms that live all throughout the soil landscape. Let's see what happens when we rain twice as much on this landscape, since we didn't see any flooding from the first rainstorm. These pore spaces make up about half of the space of soil, and they are where the air is in soil. It's where water can infiltrate into soil, and that air and water, along with photosynthesis and the sugars made by plants, sustain microbial life in the soil. So twice the amount of water, and we still have no flooding in this landscape. I'm going to pour a little more because I'm really trying to reach saturation here. Saturation will happen when we start to see water flow out from the bottom of this landscape, indicating that the water is going through the soil to the base layer. Soil is a filter, healthy soil. Biological organisms and chemical interactions with those organisms in the soil, in these pore spaces, in the sponge, actually clean water. If you had to live in these landscapes, would you choose the flour or the bread if you were a farmer? If you were growing plants of any kind, you would likely choose the bread. The bread is wet all the way through. We have full saturation. If these landscapes were out in hot, sunny conditions for days after this rainstorm, this one would evaporate and get covered with a hard, crusty surface, would not take in water the next time it rained. This one would get a little stale on the outside, so to speak, because it's bread, and down in the middle you would still have some moisture, so organisms and plants in this landscape would still be able to get a drink. If you had to build a house in one of these landscapes, you would likely choose the bread. Your house here might be in the waterway. If you had to get water from natural sources in one of these landscapes, you would likely choose the bread because you might be able to find it after it rained and you would want to drink it, as opposed to this right after a rainstorm.
That was called Flour and Bread. That is a activity that was designed by Dee Dee Pursehouse, who lives in Thetford, Vermont. She's got a website called landinleadership.org. Check her out. She's written a whole manual on soil health that's available for free. You can download it from her website, and it includes detailed instructions for that activity. That's an activity that I often start off with in all of my classes, whether I'm working with 5-year-olds or 75-year-olds. And it gives us an opportunity to work backwards, to think back, this is the flour, this is the bread. It's a really nice foundation to start the conversation. So that's why we wanted to start this conversation with you all today using that little video. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Julia. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to share our slides with you now. Julia's going to go first and talk about her experience at the school that she works at. So Julia, I'll leave it up to you to talk all about that.
Thank you. Thanks, Kat, and thank you, Natasha, for hosting us today and just being able to talk about our programs. Before I begin, too, I want to say hi to Recycle Rhonda, who's here, who's joined us, and she's in my slideshow today. Kat's going to put up a picture of our school. Smilie Memorial School is located in Buxton, Vermont. We are a small program. We have less than 100 students. We've typically had less than 100 students. And we've had a school garden place for over a decade, just under 2, with some plantings in front that have been there all along. Our garden is really enhanced by the fact that we have 2 master gardeners working on site and the help of people like Recycle Rhonda and a lot of dedicated community members who help support this. So this is not a project that is done without a larger community contributing. I would be remiss not to mention Virginia Haviland, who has really made so much of this possible. Here's Virginia on this page. Thanks, Kat. Virginia is working with students. This garden was in the back of our school, actually, near the lovely Bolton Pothole. Virginia had made an effort to get a grant that allowed for us to have, right now I think we have 10 raised beds at this point that are 15 inches deep. Some of them have perennial plantings, and they have received compost from our active school composting program. So currently on the right, you'll see, here we go. Yep, thanks. So we have a greenhouse at play here. All of our beds have some perennial plantings in them. And last year, our program did take a hit. It actually started during COVID, that we were not able to plant vegetables. So the food that we would normally put into our composting program, similar to most schools in Vermont that were shut down due to COVID, our program kind of halted for a little bit. I used my expertise at that time to put in a pollinator habitat. So if we go ahead a slide, Kat. Yep, here we go. So we put in a pollinator garden that hosts butterflies and moths. We purchased and received donations for a lot of plants. You know that whenever you have bare soil, you have an opportunity for invasives. So instead of losing our vegetable program, we took it as an opportunity, and we put in a bunch of host plants that are actually being moved about the rest of our school garden this year. Actually, I feel like I'm still covered in soil from yesterday, where we we moved over 6 yards of soil into garden beds as a school. So all of these activities are done grades pre-K through 4. All the teachers are involved. So I'm here with a mask on. You see part of Mr. Menz, our 4th grade teacher in the middle picture. Again, you're seeing masks because this was last year when we were putting these plants in, but a pretty amazing team who were all pretty upbeat about putting plants in the ground. So my students right in the middle here in front of the greenhouse, this is the garden in the fall. Unfortunately, I did take a lot of pictures over the summer. However, I assure you that the plants were lovely, and we saw a number of butterflies that we reported on iNaturalist. The program, the facts of putting in those gardens were really beneficial to the community who visit the Bolton potholes, which of course is right behind the school. All of the plants that you're sort of seeing in that middle picture, they're going back out to our pollinator beds, our rain garden, to enhance the school grounds for children to engage in outdoor education. If we could go to the next slide. There we go. So there's a picture of some folks helping restore our compost program. Again, nothing is done alone. So we have about 6 composters right outside our school cafeteria. And these are amazing little machines who produced a lot of compost for enhancing our vegetable garden beds and soon to be our pollinator habitat, which is just outside the preschool playground. We put in 5 new raised beds yesterday, which is fantastic. So these composters were accessible. They could be seen from the windows of the cafeteria. So the students, we had to train them in knowing what to put in these. Currently, with the meat that's being served in the cafeteria, we're kind of limited in our capacity. I know a lot of programs have a hot compost that's locked up and, withstands bears. Right now, we include paper towels, we include vegetables, and we include some garden material into these beds currently. We can move on to that next slide. So our principal, Barbara, here's Rhonda, and they're just cleaning up the compost space. When we think about composting at our school, one of the things that we're thinking about is the entire waste cycle. And we discourage the garbage can, essentially. So what are we doing to contribute to compost? What are we doing to reuse objects? So this is one example of a classroom setup where you have a recycling bin where we're encouraging students to not fill that up either, but to reuse as many materials as possible. A small waste basket, which is contrary to a lot of places around our country, a place for plastic recycling, so that flip-flop plastic, our compost within the classroom for snack, and then our paper towel recycling, which just consists of clean paper towels, so nothing soiled, tissues, things like that. We generally don't put in there as a way to deter spreading germs. In the next, you'll see the cafeteria at present here. Barbara is demonstrating to students as we've returned to the cafeteria how we compost and how we recycle. So the food that's going into the composters outside is generally limited to our vegetable waste. So we kind of make a special portion of that at this time because our composting program was limited from COVID. So we're working to get it back and running. It's a matter of training our students to separate their meats and their vegetables for our outdoor composter. But here you can see the system of taking care of all of the waste that's generated at the end of a meal is really considered. And we're training the next generation to think about waste in a different way. And if you can go on to the next slide, this is integrated, this concept of how do we reuse and how are we connecting to our environment is related in all of our curriculum. So here, students are engaged in outdoor work where we're drawing pictures of the river, which flows alongside of our school. We encourage students, you'll see that my preschoolers are learning the parts of flowers using recycled materials. So that's something that they made for Mother's Day last year, which mothers loved. So around this time, as we're seeing bees emerge. And other projects which are really important and include in the fall when we return to school, looking at what plants are growing at our school. So if we can go to the next slide. So pressing plants, making seed balls. Seed balls are a fantastic activity to learn about what a seed needs to grow, especially at the younger level. It also works for adults too. Having clay, having compost and basic seeds. So those could be sunflowers. If you've heard of the concept of guerrilla gardening, I love that idea of throwing wildflower seed in random places using the seed ball method. Pretty fantastic. So here one child is doing pressing flowers in that slide. We engage in, again, a lot of different types of education in terms of nature itself. So here we're using potting mix to start milkweed for our raised beds outside. So students can not only see that milkweed grows outside, but that we too can plant it. These plants were given away at our plant sale in Bolton, and I'll just plug that for a second. That's happening on the 22nd. So if you get a chance to go head down there and just check out what the kids grew, that's pretty, they worked really hard at it. The children in this image are also looking at caterpillars from the Caterpillar Lab, an awesome organization out of New Hampshire. So this is a poster. It links right back to all the names of the butterflies that these caterpillars would turn into, and things to look for when you're digging in the garden, and things to consider about overwintering insects too. And I'll try to hurry up here because I know I'm running out of time, but these are our current seed starts. This year we worked with Vermont naturalists and to grow all these beautiful plants. And if you're looking on the wall there, you might see some images of children. Those were all made using recycled materials. So we're really thinking all the time about the waste that we produce. And we could head over, yeah, so there's our 3-tier light unit got received from a grant. All of those materials used there, again, go back into the compost for next year. And that 6 system of having 6 composters help us determine which is the newest and which stuff we can use and which stuff we can contribute to that we can wait for later years. These are the beds outside of the school. You see Scylla here, which is sort of naturalized itself, even though it is not a native plant. But when you're looking at that little fence on the picture on the left there, there's a milkweed patch right under the right at the entrance of our school. And we really want to promote leaving up weeds, milkweed specifically, so children have opportunities to learn. And the soil there is going to be getting a nice healthy dose of nutrients next week. So yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit too about some of our programming. So I think we'll go to the next slide here to show you, these are 2 of the 5 raised beds that we put in. They're going to be containing sunflowers. We actually used a no-dig method. So what we did was we put cardboard at the bottom. The children added oak leaves. The children added material from the garden beds themselves. And then we've added soil on top to allow for planting in the coming weeks. Some of the activities that we engage in when we do things like this, so when we're digging in our raised beds, when we're digging in the ground, is that we're looking for insects. So just as we were looking for caterpillars in trees and on native plants, we're also looking for insects in the ground. So we want to think about insects in a couple of ways. That they're, first of all, essential to our ecosystem, and that sometimes, yeah, they're a little icky. However, we can handle this. We can do it. And when you're working with pre-K through 4, there's a lot of preconceived notions about what's going to hurt you. So, and we help children understand all these insects that you may see in the garden are helpers. So having worksheets like this that you see on the left is a really helpful activity. So having a guide for children working in the garden. So, oh, did you see a snail? How many did you see today? What color was it? Did you see some beetles? What color were they? And really thinking about what they're seeing and what do we think it's doing in the soil. A really helpful activity for children who don't want to touch things, but want to have an understanding about how things break down. I love to rot a pumpkin in the classroom. So if in the fall, when the kids come in, as you get towards that pumpkin harvesting season, you can rot that pumpkin, and that's where you can visualize what mold looks like in a way where people aren't touching it, and then put that that sort of that juice, I guess I call it pumpkin juice, back into your garden as a way to enhance your raised beds for vegetable gardening in the spring. In the center, this is an activity we're trying. I actually have a bag of inoculated oats for bokashi composting, where you can compost in a plastic bin. I think this is a really great method to show in the classroom how to do this, but how to compost in a way that is in an enclosed unit, but also to consider people who live in environments where maybe composting isn't something that they can do. Another way we engage children is vermicomposting, and that's just a fun thing to do in the classroom with your orange peels and bits of banana that you didn't want to eat, and apple cores and things like that. And then children have that opportunity to not only cut up some of the food, so sometimes we have them cut it up, but then also add it to our vermicomposting tower. Just briefly touch on this. This is me at one of my gardening projects. I use no-dig methods in every garden project that I do. I build soil, I don't destroy it. One of the methods I use is no-dig gardening. Charles Dowding's amazing book, No Dig Gardening, has helped sort of guide this journey. So this is me at one of my gardening projects as a master gardener, where we lay down cardboard, garden scraps, and then compost on top. And we can go to the next one. I found this method. This is what it used to look like. Barren patch of soil, lots of runoff into the local Lewis Creek. And this is it now. And I host garden days there frequently, and people are really surprised what it was turned into. So, and we can go to the next slide. I think, is there? Yeah, okay, there it is. That's sort of the end of the season, and it's all perennials that were donated, lots of natives, which is pretty great. Red Wagon Plants has been an incredible, Julie's been amazing in terms of donating plants at the end of the seasons. We can move on to the next slide. I found that no dig method is so easy that I did it elsewhere. So I keep doing it. I'm on number 6 outside of Smilie Memorial School. And this garden actually has been expanded 3 times this size within the past 2 years, and includes many native plants. So, and sunflowers. This is right near Ravens Ridge in Moncton / Heinsberg, whatever you want to call it. And we can keep going. Here's another site, Friendship Garden in the Quaker School Remains in Charlotte, what would be called Quaker's Corners. And this is the start. This is my February break. Cardboard and manure and garden scraps. So I feel like this application of building healthy soil doesn't just apply in the school environment. You can apply it at home. You know, it goes both ways. So yeah, I think that's the last slide. I think maybe.
Oh, yeah,
oh, there
here
we go. Okay. So just, go ahead.
No, there we go.
Okay. So just a few resources for you. Jane Sorenson's Pollinator Palette. If you're planting for pollinators after you've done your no-dig method, that's a great one. National Wildlife Federation's Plant Finder. I post all my stuff on social media, not too much stuff, just some stuff. And if you ever have any questions, you're always welcome to email me about the projects that we do. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you so much, Julia. Very inspiring. I love all your pollinator gardens. It's so great. So I'm seeing some things come into the chat. I can't actually see what they are right now, but I think what we're going to keep doing, please continue putting questions or comments in the chat. I'm going to go through my slides, and then we're going to stop sharing our screen and be able to look at each other and have a little conversation and answer some questions. Okay. Thanks again, Julia. That was awesome. And yeah, so I'm Kat Buxton. My business is Grow More, Waste Less. And I work with schools kind of all over the Upper Valley and throughout Vermont, mostly before the pandemic. My one school that I've been at for 15 years is Thetford Elementary School. It's the one school that I visit one day a week year round. And so I'm going to focus a lot on that school, but we'll get into some of the other schools. So this is the theme garden at Thetford Elementary School. We have, oh gosh, I think we're up to 19 raised beds. We have school lunch beds, which are 7 beds, and those all go to the school lunchroom. We plant only things the school lunchroom wants. The school lunch ladies also have their own garden that they like to tend. We have 3-4 gardens that support the school lunch beds, but are also themed. And then our theme gardens are really for kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, and they're focused around sensory or a particular meal or things that grow above the ground or below the ground, sometimes pollinators or 3 sisters. Those fluctuate throughout the year. We have additionally goats on site. We have apple trees, a peach tree, pear trees, blueberries, and raspberries. We have strawberries in some places, and all of this is connected into a food loop. So the students do a lot of the work. They order the seeds, they grow most of the seedlings, they plant all of the gardens, they do all of the harvest in the fall, sometimes cooking. We hope to get back to that this coming year. That was shut down because of the pandemic, but we do have a cooking cart that rolls around from classroom to classroom. Lots of nutrition activities, harvesting, cider pressing, pear pressing. We do maple sugaring. The kids help in building the raised beds, and they manage the goats. There's one 5th and 6th grade classroom that has goats as a part of their classroom project, and this is their 2nd full year. And as one of my jobs at the school, so I help to manage the gardens, and I manage their hot composting system, and I work with the teachers and students to run all of that, and additionally do some curriculum support around soil science and other science to support all of the programming. So in these pictures, you're just seeing kids in action. Yeah, in action. This was one of our amazing moments, and we hope to get back to this fall. This was the fall before the pandemic. I think this was 2019. And we broke every fire code there is, I think, in doing this. This is the primary wing of the school, where every kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade classroom harvested their garden and prepared one meal in their classroom to go into this big sit-down family style meal. And on the right is an example of what we ate that day. The cafeteria supported us with pasta because, you know, as much as we don't like it, that's all some kids will eat, but they sat down with us. And this was amazing. So this was such an incredible experience. We want to do this again. The day started with a reading of Stone Soup. It was a month long of preparing for the meal. So this is just an example of what can happen in community at a school when we grow our own food. We have our own hot composting system. We've been managing compost for about 10 years now. We started out maybe 12 years ago with some little black bins and other ways of composting. And we finally decided that we wanted to go full on and have a hot composting system. So we just have 2 bins in action. What you're seeing here on the bottom left is the original 5-bin system. That was quite a while ago, and 2 of the bins have rotted out. So I'm now replacing 1. So we'll end up with 3. In this system, we compost about 6,000 pounds of food scraps a year, including all meat and bones. It is run by the 5th and 6th grade students. They take data every time they dump the compost on the weight and mass of what goes in, both in terms of food scraps and feedstocks. The feedstocks we use are mostly produced by our goats. It's the goat manure, urine, and bedding. We use paper towels collected from the school. Sometimes we use leaves. Sometimes there's straw involved with the bedding for the goats as well, because what they don't eat gets into the bedding. And all of that is blended into our system. It takes us about 45 days to fill 1 bin, and then we flip it. So shown here, the active bin is the one that we fill every single time. When it gets filled, we turn the whole thing to the blue bin. Then we fill the active bin again. When it gets filled again, we turn what was in the blue bin to the green bin, et cetera, et cetera. So every active bin gets turned 4 times, and on its 4th time, as you can see with the orange pointing away, it goes into what we call a windrow, which is just a low pile on the ground. When we make our first turn into the blue bin, there are no recognizable food scraps except for the last deposit that was made, and maybe the exception of avocado pits, peach pits, banana tops, and of course the children's toys and fruit stickers that inevitably make their way through the entire system. This is a system at Sharon Elementary School. This is a place where I volunteer. This is my hometown, and they have just started their composting system up again, which got shut down over the pandemic. So here we have a community work day where we're laying hardware cloth inside the bins. Before I go into this piece, I just want to say the students at Thetford Elementary, which you can see on the bottom right, this is an old picture. Those girls, I think, are graduated now. They are entering data into a Google spreadsheet. So it's a Google form. Every time they go out to deposit compost, they're doing the weight and the volume. They're doing a squeeze test to test the moisture in the bin. They're taking the temperature in 3 places, and they're also calculating if we need any more materials, etc. All of this goes into a spreadsheet that then is populated with all of this data that our teachers are then able to use for a variety of math and science inquiry projects, which the kids enjoy because they understand the data, the numbers come to them. So, some of the things that the kids have been able to do just from working with the compost is they've been learning about presentations and public speaking, advertising campaigns for how to keep waste and trash out of food scraps and why it's important to compost, PSA announcements to the school and other students, pamphlets. The app that we created to calculate data was originally created by students and a parent. There's a lot of graphing activities. Every year, the students start off the year with 2 weeks worth of information about composting. What is the difference between decomposition and composting? What is the history of composting? What are the connections to climate change? And what is climate change? So some of the connections we talk about are the reduced carbon emissions from trucking compost all around, the reduced methane emissions from adding organic matter into landfills, and the increased soil health, which enables better water infiltration and diversity and biodiversity in landscapes. So that's something we also talk about a lot, is biodiversity and all shapes and sizes, why it's important, where it is. It's so exciting. I could just go on and on and on about diversity. This is again at Thetford Elementary School, getting into our soil science unit. So in addition to composting, the students do a soil science unit where they're learning about water infiltration. We use water infiltration rings to measure the timing of how long it takes to infiltrate an inch of water in various places throughout the schoolyard. We add compost over the years to certain places and track that so that we can track the changes in water infiltration rates as we improve the soil in the schoolyard. We do bulk density tests and use soil probes and dig holes and look at bugs and worms and all sorts of things and really get them excited about microbes. One of the exciting things that's happening this year is the school right next to us is the academy, and that's 7 through 12. So Thetford Elementary is K through 6. At this point, the high school, 7 through 12, is full of students that know how to compost because of Thetford Elementary, but they haven't been able to install a composting system. And we've just received word that they're going to be putting in a composting system, and they're looking forward to next year's 7th and 8th graders leading the process at the high school, which for me is a dream come true. On the bottom left here, you're looking at compost windrows. They're a little flattened right now because we're digging into them to get our finished compost to put them back into our gardens. And on the bottom right, you're looking at what we call an observation hoop, where we really are looking at the biodiversity existing within a small space. And we get to measure the percentage of place that has bare soil, that is covered in green growing plants, the number of species inside that ring, and insects, etc. Some of the tools we use in soil science they look like this. On the left side is a modified rainfall simulator where we rain on top of these bits of soil, and then we watch to see how much water runs off as opposed to how much water infiltrates, and that gives us an opportunity to talk about different ways of managing soil. And on the right-hand side, this is called an aggregate stability test, AST. Those are two very clear reused containers in honor of Julie and all of the reusing. I really love that. And some hardware cloth folded into the top, also reused sections from compost bins. And what we do is we take small chunks of soil. We look for one that might represent a flower-like landscape and one that might represent a bread-like landscape. And we slowly sink them into the water into the baskets, and you can see what happens. The one in the back that's all brown is your flower landscape that was taken from a tilled garden site where you get these hard balls of soil because we leave our garden beds uncovered a lot of the time. And when we drop that slowly into the water, it basically dissolved like an Alka-Seltzer tablet and left the water extremely cloudy. And on the right side, we had one with living roots with all those glues, snots, and slimes holding those soil aggregates together. And you can see how clean the water is. And another example of how living landscapes are a filter for water. This is some of the graphs that the kids come up with in math class, using their compost data to be able to show things like mean and average and charting, and they do pie charts and all sorts of things. We also use this space for our community, the Thetford Elementary School. This is on the right side. We're teaching a class. I think this might have been with the Vermont Community Gardening Network or Farm to School Network. I can't remember, but we often, we have groups from all over the state come and visit our school to see what we're doing and try to replicate it. And on the left side, we've got a couple of master composters who are earning their service hours helping to turn bins and times where students are not able to. We always try to have the students do the work, but anyone who's a teacher knows that you've got to be able to roll with things and you never know how it's going to go, and especially over the last couple of years. So again, this is more master composter work. We've been a master composter project site for about 10 years, and that's something that I offer to the composting program. This slide is really focusing on a program called Regeneration Corps, regenerationcorps.org. The website's on the bottom of the page. I highly recommend you check it out. It's really exciting. We've been doing this for about 2 years now. It's a learning movement for land and justice for high school aged students. We are starting to work with some middle school groups as well. We teach about the intersections of regenerative agriculture, climate change, and anti-racism, social justice, all through the lens of a just transition. We work with schools so that students get credit for working with us. Ideally, this is happening during school time. It's not an extra thing, although we do offer opportunities in partnership with farms and community sites where we plant trees together. And sometimes that happens during school hours and sometimes it happens after. We've got a community food forest we're working with in West Hartford. We're working with Cedar Mountain Farm, the Center for Grassroots Organizing, and about 12 schools between Marshfield and Ludlow, Vermont. We hope to expand into more schools, and we're always looking for site leads. So if this is something that interests you, you should definitely get in touch. I could talk about that forever, but I'm not gonna. So yeah, you know, all of my work and all of the work I do with Regeneration Corps and Apple Corps and a bunch of the other groups that I work with in the world is all about connecting communities, engaging in curiosity, and really getting us all to love and honor microbes and all of the processes that they do for us on behalf of the ecosystem for our social mycelium. So I'm really interested in building that social mycelium. One of the ways that we do that, I think this is my last slide, is through the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition, which is an organization that I co-founded. We have an email list. We're on Facebook. We've run the soil series. We've got a YouTube page with lots and lots of resources available for people, and everyone is welcome. Our goal is to really create a safe and comfortable space for everyone to learn how that as a part of the social mycelium, we can shift the paradigm of how we interact with each other and the land. And that is it. Okay, that's our big presentation. That was a whole lot of information. So let me get my screen back in order here.
Mm-hmm.
And
while you're doing that, Kat, I'll just put a plug in. The Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition is one of the most active, information-rich, curious, fabulous listservs that I am on. So if any of this stuff interests you, it's one of the emails that I consistently open when it shows up in my inbox. So just a little plug for that community. It's fabulous.
Oh, thanks, Natasha. And that community is totally reflective of the community. The goal is to make it accessible. Every question is welcome. We want everyone to feel welcome to learn and grow with all of us together as we learn about this amazing food web that supports us underneath our feet. Okay, so I am going to take a minute to get caught up with the chat, and I wonder, we wanted to do some activities with you, or show you activities, basically show you some of the activities that are accessible, that Julia and I both like to work with. But I think first we should engage in some conversation, and let's answer some of these questions that are coming in the chat. So I'm just going to go down from the top. Okay. Yes, we will provide a link to the video. That was the flour and bread video. I'll throw that in the chat today, and we'll make sure that everything that we've shared here today is available through CAV. Natasha will have it all. So anybody who needs slides, activities, links, whatever, absolutely. Always welcome to, absolutely, we'll share that stuff. And thanks for putting the land and leadership link in there, Natasha.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the full circle composting and full circle gardening, it's something Julia and I we love to do, right? We just can't help ourselves. This is the first time that Julia and I have been able to connect with each other. So thank you, Natasha, for connecting us, because it's just so wonderful to know that there are a number of us out there, and I know a number of other people doing this similar work out in Vermont. So it's so cool. Oh yeah, I'm sorry about the Zoom control bar covering the slides. I don't know how to.
And we can
I'm sorry.
provide a PDF of the slide deck as well when I post it. And so that'll be part of the materials that you guys have access to. So
Yeah, and Sunny says this extends to prepared college classes will formalize social norms and be lasting in grown-ups, general attitudes and values to flow out normally. Oh, yes. That's a goal, right? This is certainly what we hope. I wish that I had access to these kinds of programs when I was a kid. Although I ended up here anyway. I wonder where I'd be if I had had that nourishing love for nature as a child. Thanks for the reminder to get out there and play in the soil. You're welcome. And okay, here's one for Julia. Julia says this, Abigail says the school is implementing so many great and educational projects. I love how many different ways you integrate zero waste and ideas about plants and compost. Educating children young and getting them excited about it is great and important.
Absolutely. I think there's actually a really great organization here in Charlotte where there's work on cleaning up roadways, right? And noticing waste, noticing how it impacts the world around us. And there are many great videos out there about zero waste places, zero waste little towns, especially there's one in Japan that's really cool to check out. It's interesting to show children that video because they reuse absolutely everything, or they find a way to recycle it and they select their products very carefully. If I can find a clip to that, I will certainly pass it on. But just to think about things a little bit further, is this compostable? Is this thing that I'm buying, is this thing that I'm eating, where does it go when I'm done with it? During COVID especially, I think we decided that it was better for us as humans to throw away so many things. And I think that's still happening. So when we are considering that moving forward, knowing that a plastic spoon is going to stay with you for 250 years, more, I don't know, what is the implication? So I don't mean to depress children. I'm certainly not trying to, but I'm just trying to get people to think about that in terms of the selections that they make. And that's something for cafeterias to consider as well. But yeah, in ways that are positive, of course.
Yeah.
So,
Well, on that note, I want to say that our program at Thetford Elementary, and I see a question here, somebody's asking how, Rhonda wants to know how big is the school? Thanks for the question. I didn't mention that. We have about 220 kids and about 40 staff, although staffing's been a challenge lately, but that's about our size. Our class sizes are about 16 kids per class, anywhere between 11 and 18 per class. And so when we started our composting program at school, it really heightened the awareness of all materials. Where do they come from? Where do they go? And our recycling increased amazingly. And we started using our paper towels as one of our feedstocks. We started more and more finding our feedstocks closer to home until we finally got goats. And now everything comes from the schoolyard. Between improving our recycling program and our composting program, we've been able to save 75% of our costs from the time that we started the program on waste removal. And the way we were able to measure that is that we used to get one dumpster a week in trash removal, and now we get one a month. And that's been consistent for years. New administration and new maintenance has made it difficult for me to come up with numbers now because all those changes happened before they came. But right now, I could say that we don't pay anything for food scrap removal, which a lot of schools are doing. And we also don't pay anything for compost, ever. We save a little bit of money on our food, but not much, 220 kids. You need more than 17 raised beds and some fruit trees. But we do have a nice supplement, and it builds a sense of ownership and deliciousness, which is great. So another question coming in is, how are you weighing the materials? We went and found like grandma's old scale that you stand on. really heavy duty one that can handle being outside in the wintertime, and we leave it under our covered shed, and it's beautiful. And that's what we do. We keep our food scraps in 5-gallon buckets, and so the students just put the 5-gallon bucket on the scale and they get the weight. Simple as that. Are there many materials out there for connecting compost to the language, arts, and history? I'm not familiar with a lot of materials on that. We talk about agrarian societies and how people used to stay in one place, or they used to move around, and then we started agrarian societies and staying in one place, and then we started having stuff accumulate because we stayed in one place, and then on to the industrial age and all. So we kind of go through the sort of history of waste, but it would be wonderful to have those materials. If anyone has access to something like that, I would love to put it in shared folders to get it out there to folks. Some of the more recent, I guess you could call it history, is really using some of the materials from Kiss the Ground, which is an organization out of California. I know, I think Phineas gave the keynote for the CAV conference, and they've got quite a lot of materials. Their videos are something I show very often to kids, and they include some really important facts, like 64 billion tons of food waste a year goes into our landfills currently. And those are really important facts for kids to know. Or we could fill the Rose Bowl. What is it the kids came up with? I think we could fill the Rose Bowl. I think it's more than once a year.
No, I think it's like twice a day or something like
that. Oh my God.
Insane. Yeah. There's a link to that on the CAV website as part of the Soil Builders program. And I might be getting that wrong, but it was like, when I saw that, it was like staggering.
Yeah, it's stunning.
Yeah.
So I probably underestimate it every time because I just can't believe it's true, but there you go.
Yeah.
So great question. Thank you. And please share, anybody, if you've got good
and Kat,
language, arts, and history.
I'll add really quickly that Wendy Sue Harper, who's on my board and who teaches, I teach a couple modules of the Master Composter program here at University of Vermont, and she does as well. And she just recently updated sort of what is compost and the history. And I know she added a lot of information about indigenous and forms of composting that, we often, many programs kind of skip to the European discovery or invention of compost, and really it's been happening since there have been human settlements in one, and often in a variety of different ways than we're familiar with. And so I could check and see about maybe linking to some of that material as well.
That'd be great. Yeah, like simple systems of just burying in a pile of leaves, right? Or digging a hole.
Yeah, or the seed ball thing is another thing that I know is part of that history. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Someone is asking, how can we invite you to present for a group? I think Julia or I would be welcome to receive an email invitation. So we'll make sure that our emails are shared out. I think we both love to talk about this stuff. So thanks for asking. And are you aware of grant sources available to support Vermont schools or municipal solid waste entities to offer some of these projects? That's a tricky one. I would say, though, that one of my most go-to grant sources that I tell schools about are either farm-to-school grants through a variety of farm-to-school organizations. Vermont Feed is one that really does a great job of pulling everything together. And another would be the Northeast Grassroots Environmental Fund. They offer a rolling grant. It's a seed grant of $1,000, and a rolling grant meaning you can apply anytime and the funding comes pretty quickly if you're accepted. And then they offer a follow-up grow grant for more money to take projects to another step forward. So those can often be a really good starting place for grants. I will just sort of seed this little idea. One of the projects that I'm working on over the next 3 to 5 years is a 4 supervisory union composting project where we'll be working with all of the schools that want to within these 4 supervisory unions, all near me. Sorry, I had to start at home. And the goal will be for every school that wants to get a top of the line roofed hot composting system with all the curriculum and technical support to go along with it. So fingers crossed that happens and that becomes a model that then can be replicated pretty easily throughout the state. Yeah, so hopefully.
Can I add, one of the other questions related to this is if you could give a range or an idea of the cost to schools for this kind of programming, so folks have some idea of, like, you know, what might they want to start thinking of raising.
Well, I'll give you the high end cost, and Julia might be able to come in with a low end cost, because those little black composters are pretty inexpensive. Your biggest cost there is going to be time, labor, and the sorting out of meat scraps. Our composting system at Thetford Elementary School costs about $1,500 to build. That's all the materials. It was built with volunteer labor. And then our roof was about $6,000. But what we're trying to budget for this big grant is $10,000 to $20,000 per school, because that would account for buckets and barrels and wagons and tools and lids and all of the things.
Yeah, a couple other potential funding sources, just to throw it out, and this is no guarantee because it's been a little while, but community resilience organizations, CROW, used to have, at least they used to have, a small grants program for community groups, and I think this would fit certainly within their mission. And then the Vermont Community Fund has some, I mean, they have all kinds of different programs, but they do have some small grant programs, and some of them are specific to activities or geographic locations. So it's always worth checking out there and seeing, depending on where you are, there might be a fit. I know we did use, I partnered with Wyndham Solid Waste Management District to get their, they funded in part the backyard and community composting demonstration site. So a bunch of different systems, and so that's just an example of you know, and of course volunteer time and matching, and, you know, we kind of cobbled things together. But there are a number of small grants, and then NEGF, the New England Grassroots Fund that Kat mentioned, is a great opportunity for folks as well. Also
want to mention the Vermont Gardener Network. That used to be the Community Gardening Network, is now the Vermont Garden Network. Yeah. Got to mention them. They're doing great work on gardens and composting throughout the state. Julia, did you want to add anything?
Oh, that's exactly what I wanted to add, Kat, that they really tend to list a lot of grants, some that are offered on the national level and some that are offered locally by a number of different organizations. And I believe, well, one of the grants anyway that Smilie received came from a listing from there. And of course, Vermont Medical Center, which under its former name, we received a grant at one point from them in order to build our raised beds. And I also think, you know, there's a lot to be said for those fundraisers and community support generally that really can help make these projects move forward, especially when you demonstrate that you're starting something, that you're interested in doing something. Smilie's program started in a small bucket. So our compost program was a bucket from a teacher who was curious. And so I think that, you know, even if you start small, that it can become something much bigger when people start to notice that the children get excited about it, and, you know, you get it out there. We've got a lot of social media networks now too that help get you in newspapers and get your project out there, so people like master gardeners in your area too can pick up some of those ideas and connect you with a master composter, for instance, you know, things like that. And I will say that the composters that we used were really cheap. I think at the time it was like $40 a composter. I have also made composters out of pallets, untreated pallets, but I've made them out of pallets. So I think that's the sort of distinction there, is the untreated pallet. And to note, Bolton is a town of bears and boulders. So we have to be really careful. We've had bears walk through our playground before, right? So when we're thinking about composting, we are thinking about safety, and we're also thinking about animals pillaging our compost. You know, we're in the middle of the Green Mountains. So I would love for Smilie to have one of those systems at some point that's a little more complex. But starting, where we are with even one composter could be a significant difference in how children look at how to deal with food waste.
That's right. I also wanted to mention the Jora composting. It's a JORA. We can probably include some links to learn more about those. And those are an in-vessel composter that's insulated and you can spin it. And they're actually really good in bear country. I don't have personal experience with them, but some colleagues of ours do and swear by them. I know many schools are starting to use those too, especially in bear country. And yeah, I'm a big advocate of pallet bins. Also, untreated is extremely important. And just simple hemlock bins, you can slap them together. I also just wanted to mention one thing we're doing. So at Regeneration Corps, it's a lot of my work these days and working with high school kids. Down at the Windsor High School, we've got some students that wanted to implement composting, but their school administration is really nervous about it. They've seen things go wrong. They know it'll fall on them. So but the kids are so excited. They're building a bin. They're giving one bin to the community garden. They're going to have one at school. It's small scale. This is a school that produces 4 48-gallon totes a week of food scraps. So composting there would be a huge project. We're going to do it in this big supervisory union plan in the future. But to start, we're collecting 1 or 2 buckets a week from the kitchen where the food scraps are absolutely clean and there won't be any meat. And we're going to start composting at a very small scale so that the students can begin to learn the science and so that the administration can begin to gain the trust, or the students can gain the trust of the administration that they know how to do it. So it can always be done on a really small scale too for the lesson, as Julia was mentioning. I see back to the chat here, hydraulic example of soil acting as a cleaner. Yeah, through transparent bucket was awesome. Visible results lead to action. That aggregate stability test is super fun. I do it all the time. And sometimes I'm surprised by the results. I think it's going to fall apart and it didn't. So it's very informative for myself too, as I begin to learn more about ecosystems and landscapes that are functioning and those that are not. I would love to hear y'all's opinion on how to encourage larger schools or schools that are not as open to hands-on teaching or off-standard teaching. That would be awesome to have a shared file for such resources. Yeah, that's a big, we could have a whole workshop on that. But I want to promote one resource that came to mind, and that is the Community Schools Blueprint, written by Dr. Kathleen Kesson. It's just come out this year. We can find a link and make sure that goes in the follow-up notes too. And Dr. Kesson has been working on this concept for a really long time, and I think you might find some of those answers or suggestions there. And I invite you to learn more about Regeneration Corps. We're trying. I saw somebody was asking, what do we charge to work with schools? So Regeneration Corps doesn't charge schools anything. We're 100% private funded, grant funded. Sometimes schools that can afford it will offer us some money, but it's never an issue. We do not want in any way to be a barrier to anyone. So the only thing limiting our ability with Regeneration Corps is our actual capacity. So we need to train more people to help us do this great work. So if you're interested, get in touch about that. And as far as like my work with Thetford Elementary School, I do that on a consulting basis, and I'm paid a stipend every year. I've been with the school for 15 years. I volunteered for the first 3 or 4, and now I get a really good stipend to be there throughout the year. And other schools usually pay me through grants, and my rate changes depending on the school, how far away it is and stuff like that. But typically between 35 and 75 an hour is my rate.
Kat, I wanted to say that goes such a long way as a classroom teacher. Time is so limited in terms of what we have to teach, and just behavior management, right? Just like try to get everybody in line. And this type of education helps with that classroom spirit, and then it also helps teach that responsibility piece. So I think anytime a school can bridge that gap, between their environmental education, their personal actions, so how they take care of food, how they take care of recycling, and having that party come in and show you, having like somebody like Kat come in and show you what to do, you've instantly got an inspired student body, and now it also helps motivate your leadership as a classroom teacher to motivate things to move forward, that we can actually make a change. So I highly recommend, when we can, now that we can have speakers back, I think I'd like to say that as a whole for Vermont, that we can have people back.
I think so.
At least outside anyway, too, depending on the comfort of the speaker, that's such a valuable resource, especially if you don't want to do field trips. Field trips aren't your cup of tea. Learning about your local environment is so important. So.
Agreed. And, that just makes me want to give a real big shout out to teachers like you, Julie, who managed to run a classroom and do all of this work. It's really, really incredible. I don't know a single teacher who hasn't struggled pretty significantly in the last couple of years. And all schools are still struggling with not having enough staff and missing days. It's been really rough. And so kudos to all the teachers out there. We couldn't do this without you. Am I missing stuff in the chat here?
Did we address how larger schools can approach some of this? There was a question there.
Yeah, no, well, we didn't. And so I can give that a shot. Larger schools, the biggest trouble with larger schools is just making the connection and having consistent communication. It can be so hard to get in the door and to have someone who's coordinating in the school. And that's challenging in every school, but the bigger the school gets, the more challenging that is. So I think the first thing is having a grounded person in school that can be a coordinator, and ideally also including somebody from like cafeteria or maintenance, like a grounds person is really important. Someone from the administration, someone who's a teacher, and then ideally bring in, now that we can bring parents back and community members, and of course, students. We've got to have student interest or it's never going to work. And ideally, the students are leading the project with their ideas and we're just supporting them. But my first place is always to check in with either the nurse, the school counselor, the school principal. Those are generally my first places to check in. I hope that helps. Is he John?
Yeah, but just before we go to John, I just want to say that you also don't have to feel like you have to compost at larger schools all of the food scraps that you're producing. I know Charlotte Central School actually sends a portion of their scraps to a local compost facility. They have a hauler partnership, but they do have a very active and great at school composting system. And that's one strategy that I've seen with some larger schools is it can be very overwhelming if you're thinking you have to manage everything that's produced, but you really don't. You just need to get started, like Julie's example about a bucket or a small bin or whatever it is, and figure out how to manage that otherwise. So I just wanted to add that. But yeah, John, you have your hand up. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is a really interesting space to me. I work at EPA headquarters on the food waste team, but my mom was an educator for 40 years. So in the last few years of her teaching, I had discovered composting in our backyard, and I encouraged her to kind of do it at her school. So on Earth Day, she would use our tumbler from our backyard and show the finished product to the students. They loved it. And I've personally, on my spare time, I've always wanted to do work with schools. So I landed a little bit of funding, but I'm never able to get into them. Like I've reached out to principals, I've reached out to teachers, I've reached out to administrators, I've reached out to cafeteria staff, I've reached out to, anyone, you name it, curriculum directors. it almost seems to me like unless it's something that they're willing to do on their own volition at this time, teachers are so busy that it's like they're gonna respond maybe and say either we'd like to do it but we don't have time, or they just won't respond at all because they're like we have so many other things on our plate. So I don't know. I have yet to even really figure that out myself. But
And where are you, John? Are you in the?
So I'm in DC right
DC?
now, which we're more likely to have schools in this area doing things around sustainability, but where I'm trying to do my core work is actually back in central Wisconsin, where I'm from.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Any suggestions help?
Yeah, go ahead, Julia.
Well, I think that there's a lot of school gardens that are out there, and sometimes connecting with a program that does have a school garden I would say in Wisconsin, like there might be a program within the district that you're in that you can connect with and just see what they're doing. Just introduce yourself. Hey, I heard about your program. In terms of listings of school gardens, there is a school garden network, and I know that there's lots of organizations who have attempted to map this sort of thing, and that's kind of hard. So I would reach out to like your local, I know you've tried, but see if there's a Master Gardener chapter, first of all, who's working with local schools. So perhaps that would be the way to go. And then see through that group, perhaps that would help you reach those folks. I think we have you have to get like a background check and stuff to come to our school. That's a huge thing. With Master Gardener, all of us have background checks to work with children. So there's a couple hoops you do have to jump through to get involved in school education, unless you're a parent. That's sort of like the shoe-in, right? But I think it's accessible through organizations like Master Gardener.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
That's a great suggestion. Schools are very insular places, and I don't have children, so I've experienced that a lot. I never really experienced schools except for when I was in one. So when I first started working with schools, it was a little bit of a challenge to make that connection. I love Julia's idea. Find a project that's already existing and offer to help. And that's a really good way to sort of just get your foot in the door and get to understand one school at a time. Also, I just wanted to mention the conservation districts. I'm not sure what they're called in Wisconsin, but conservation districts or the Conservation Service can also be really helpful. Sometimes, depending on the state, they often can work really closely with schools. Sunny, I want to meet you. I'm loving all of your comments.
Thank you. I think all of us also loved your presentation and everybody's participation.
Thank you, Sunny. And I saw your email. I will be in touch. Thank you so much. Okay, how are we doing on time? We have just 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
So, you know what? Can I just for a second, I just want to flip through I want to share my screen and flip through some activities to leave you all feeling inspired in case you're not already feeling inspired. Hang on, I just got to find it. Okay, we're going to go here, share. Okay, I'm just going to flip through quickly some of the activities that I like to use at schools. This one, so we're always talking about vocabulary, and vocabulary is important. And I remember being in school and I hated having to use this word in a sentence. But I love charades. So one of the things we do is we collect our vocabulary words. This is particularly soil and climate words that we use. And then we sometimes use these and play charades to get the definitions understood. The flour and bread exercise is actually a really great way to have students perform the flour and bread exercise without words. or, you know, and then pointing and asking the audience to come up with the words. So this is just one way to do that. That's fun. There are these really great little, you know, you can make a relay out of this. How do you sort items? Can you reuse it? Do you throw it away? Is it recyclable? Is it compostable? And you can imagine that you could make all sorts of cutouts like this. Here's one that's just soil and decomposition, life cycle, which is really helpful, not just for little kids, but the big kids enjoy seeing this as well. And then there's lots of opportunity to talk about the in-betweens of this circle of life. Compost glossary. Again, charades is great for that. It gets really fun. Coloring sheets galore. There are lots of them. Some are more educational than others. There's a lot of information out there about vermiculture. I often bring my worms to school on field trips to use with the younger kids especially. This is, you saw this in Julia's presentation. This is from Do the Rot Thing, which is a Vermont publication. Excellent publication with lots of cool stuff. It's not super fancy and on digital. I think it's actually photocopied, but it's great. Storytelling wheel. So how to compost. This is little kids. And you've got this wheel of what's going on. You can have these for growing plants. You can have it for how to compost. And then you can spin your wheel, and there's a bit of a coloring sheet. Fun facts about red worms. There's a lot we don't know about worms, and there's a lot we think we know about worms. Here's the anatomy of a worm, which gets into an opportunity to talk about sex. Worms and bacteria, you know, so this is true and false. What's true, what's false? This is also an opportunity to talk about truth in media. So there are lots of extensions from these, depending on the age group that you're working with. This, just a simple activity, worms in the garden. None of these are mine, by the way. These are all gotten off the internet, and I have them all saved and ready to share for people. This one is that we're learning about invertebrates, soil ecosystems, composting observations, etc. And it's actually pretty lengthy. It's a great one. And then warming up to worms. So this, some of these are really great at just helping kids to get over the ick factor and becoming comfortable with our brothers and sisters, the insects. So I hope that was helpful to you. And again, we would love to share all of our stuff with you. I wonder if there are any other questions, or Julie, if you have anything you want to say before Natasha closes us out.
No, just thank you to everybody for being here and for your interest. It's folks like you who can make a big difference in children's lives, you know, that they can understand the importance of compost. So I just really appreciate that you're all here listening to us talk about this subject we're so passionate about, and appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you all so much for participating and helping us close out the Vermont Organics Recycling Summit. This is the last session. And I just want to extend a super thanks to Kat and Julia for sharing all of your enthusiasm and energy. What a fabulous way. And I love the symmetry of starting with Finny and Makepeace from Kiss the Ground, actually referencing Dee Dee Pursehouse and that bread and flour exercise, but not having it there, and then closing the summit with actually having an opportunity to share that and see you do it, Kat. So fabulous, bringing us all the way full circle. I hope that you all have enjoyed the sessions you participated in this week, and reach out to me at any time if there's specific things or folks you want to connect with or resources that you need that you're not seeing. Just reach out by email or phone, and I really look forward to continuing to work with you all to build this community and support all of your fabulous work. And with that,
thanks so much.
We're going to close the summit.
Yay!
So, thank you all, and be well.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody. Have a wonderful sunny weekend.
Yeah. Take care, everyone.